Hello, everyone. We'll get started. Welcome to the China Seminar Series hosted by the Australian Centre of China of the World here at Australian National University. I am one of the conveners of the China Seminar Series, Dr. Matthew Galway, Senior Lecturer of Chinese History here at ANU. Before I introduce our speaker today, I'll just an acknowledgement that we are on the unceded ancestral lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, these First Nations, and we pay respect as we are on these lands to elders past and present. Now, a little bit about our speaker today before he presents, Professor Yujie, who is an associate professor at the Center of Heritage and Museum Studies here at the ANU. He earned his PhD in anthropology from the illustrious Heidelberg University, which is in Germany, and his research focuses on the cultural politics of the past within diverse heritage and memory spaces in China. His recent books include Heritage Tourism, which he published in 2021 with Cambridge University Press, Heritage Politics in China, came out just a year earlier, very productive, Yujie, with Routledge, and Heritage and Romantic Consumption in China with Amsterdam University Press in 2018. Now, that is a tough act to follow, I must say. I got one out. He's got three in the span. I wrote one. Very, very impressive. He currently holds an Australian Research Council Discovery Grant from 2023 to 2025 on memory politics in China. And we're all very much excited to hear his talk today, which is based on his forthcoming book that examines China's heritage through history. Without further ado, Professor Zhu, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Introduction and just see everyone can you hear me clearly, and also wonder if anyone can, because we also have had this online, to see if everyone online can you hear me clearly. That would be great if you just send a message on the chat box to show that you can hear this clearly. Thank you. I'd like to traditional custodian of the land. I pay my respect to the known and number of people. And not only because we are doing this in the country, also because as a heritage scholar person, I find this very meaningful. And sincerely, I think very important for all of us pay our respect and a social relationship with the past, present, future, especially we are here in this event. Also, I noticed that we have this online as a hybrid event, so I pay my respect to whenever you are. I know people come from different places. I think this is very important recognition. The other part of recognition I would like to do is this, as Matt just mentioned, it's a book project emerging during COVID-19 when, as an apologist, I can't travel, do my field work in China. Of course, it's often a disaster for an apologist have to do field work. And we also encounter, we see a lot of global crisis, and then we see conflicts, wars, everything, disasters. All this challenging me to think about what scholar actually means, what the university should do responding to all of this, and eventually broader question is what humanity does in response to the times of social crisis. This inspired me to think about something on this project as a scholar working on cultural heritage. I look forward back in terms of what history can tell us about heritage. And often people dealing with medication science are dealing with the future. And today, we're going back to the past. As an anthropologist rather than a historian, I really been grateful for a lot of support and collaboration and from my colleagues, especially here at China in the World, because a lot of scholars here offer a lot of good advice. And also I know some of the scholars from online, they also offer a lot of good advice. I really have been thankful for all along support all along this journey. 2023 last summer in June, it's a hot day. I started doing my field work in China right after COVID. I came across this place, beautiful place. It's an Orchid Pavilion, Lanting Chinese, in which I came across a group of students who just finished their examination except they still not relaxed, they have to participate in a study camp organized by the school in this place. It was a 1-week trip for them, dress up traditional clothes and learning calligraphy, learning literature, Chinese classical literatures, and also doing some games. So when I was there, it's a very hot summer, and these students sit around these rendering streams and play this game. And you can see in the middle of the photo, there was a cup, floating cup, swimming around the streaming place. And when the cup stopped somewhere close to one person, that person was asked to recite a poem. Remember, they just finished their examination, so they still should remember at least some poem from the textbooks. If you don't really remember, you got a punishment or a reward. The reward is drink the water in the bottle. Of course, as school students, it's not alcohol, but water. Interestingly, we figure out this is not just happening at the moment, only one kind of game. This practice of reciting poem, drinking water, a cup of water, flowing the stream in the party, took place in this past almost 1700 years. And which is very important cultural practice associated with this place, this gathering, and also this calligraphy. And that comes to the main thing of the talk and also my book project, which I'm interested in the long history of collecting, reproducing, reinterpreting the past, which associates shaping our Chinese cultural identity, legitimizing political authority, and facilitating knowledge transmission and social transformation. But by asking in my book, who have been the key players? What methods have been employed to achieve those practices? And how have these practices shaped the societies? And of course, this is a very ambitious project. And by going to in details of this project, we have to define what actually heritage is, as we are talking about different things in different disciplines. And often heritage is a metaphorical term. And in the Western English terminology, that heritage was in longitude perspective, it's often associated with Western anti-colonialism movement in even roots back to the early 1st century. And often it's associated with different materiality. Humankind, whenever you are, we often observe life changing, things come and goes. Just like today, we are in the autumn seasons. That's to encounter that kind of change. Humans develop different kind of techniques to develop a certain sense of permanence and monumentality. That's why we have techniques of fresco techniques, sculpture, oil paintings, and building in stone to capture that sense of beauty and to capture that kind of monumentality of the past. That's kind of Western-centric notion of heritage leads to different materiality, like paintings and also cultural relics and monuments. In the past several decades, there's a development of social scholarship influenced by Foucauldian and sociological studies. And in addition to looking at cultural heritage as material objects, we're looking at process of meaning making. That's why this project also inspired by those scholarship and looking at practice of collecting, preserving, reproducing, consuming, but also including forgetting and destroying the past. I'm interested in the power of knowledge production and transmission, which in my early work, I'm talking about heritage politics, but also looking at a particular form of consumption in the modern Chinese society. If we look at history, this kind of history, heritage is often associated with a particular idea of antiquity in Chinese Wu. But that term has shifted into modern society into the idea of heritage, So in my conceptualization, the idea of heritage not only associated with the abstract philosophical term historicity, but also associated with a very material perspective like sites and objects, but also practice like imitating the past, Fangu, restoring the past, Fugu, and traveling to ancient sites, Fangu in the other term. My talk will be separated in two parts, just like my book. The first part set up a historical context offer us a long perspective, how different kind of heritage has been transformed from imperial area to contemporary area. And my second part of my talk, like my book, we're looking at different case studies. And today, we'll focus on one local site, particularly because due to limited time constraint. In the imperial area, again, this is a very generalization of only for a historical context. In the imperial area, in the different dynasties, imperial courts often interested in using the different past to develop different sense of mundane or habit, TME. So the imperial courts, including the empires, often using collecting different imperial objects and endorse and asking particular departments and of scholars, literates, and to write official and develop official history, 正史, or develop an organization of Confucian classics and restore ancient rites in the past. Often that refers to Zhou dynasty. All of this practice, including collection, history writing, classics, knowledge development, and ancient rites restoration, all contribute to social hierarchy and the continuity of power. In the meantime, as we said from the imperial court, but also different in the society level, especially in the high class level, scholars and often is also interested in you looking at the study of the past. This happened especially during the Song, since the Song dynasty started, scholars start scholars started getting interested in material objects, for instance, like stone and bronze. Because they noticed that the text also become very fragile, while text inscribed in stones making are stronger to maintain, easier to maintain, and that's why their information are more reliable. Those scholars to start to collect those material like inscriptions, and sometimes they also contribute to document local information through local gazetteers, defunction. Some rich families, especially after Ming dynasties, they started doing private collections. One of the very important techniques happened both in the imperial court and also in the local society level is rubbing. The idea of rubbing is a practice to transform original text into some other formats. The rubbing is often a reliable reproduction of the text that can be transmitted for future generations. That also leads to motivate a lot of scholars to collect all of the rubbings. So rubbings become very important information resources for future knowledge and transmissions. In Song dynasties, there's a lot of scholars, as I said, interested in collect rubbings and also study them. One of the good examples, in addition to Ouyang is Lu Daling here in the left side, that Lu has collected a lot of objects and categorized them into a book of publications, using illustration and information to illustrate different forms of antiquities in the past. And his writing, his project illustrating antiquities, has become a foundation of later antiquarianism and also archaeology in modern era. But his work was not just for fun. As he was written in his proscript to this work, he said, "I do not dare to treat artifacts as mere playthings. By observing their artifacts and reciting these inscriptions, the appearance and form seem to chase after the legacy of the Sui dynasty, the Shaoxing, as if seeing the individuals themselves. With a contrary intention to my own desire, I may delve deeply into the original production to fill in the gaps and deficiencies of the classics and histories or correct errors from the various Confucian scholarships, so people from the later generation who are interested in antiquity can consider them as references." This is only a rough translation by my own. Now we're time traveling back to the modern era. Again, it's only a generalization on time framework to contribute to later actual cases. A bit different from the imperial era, what happened in this transition, late Qing dynasty to the modern early 20th century, was we have encountered with a lot of disaster, especially from the Western. This was Opium Wars, but also a lot of adventure from the European society came to China and utilized in the name of study. They took a lot of objects back to Europe. In addition to that, there's a lot of illegal trafficking and leads to loss of objects. And now we can see a lot of them in different museums, including British Museum in London. In the meantime, scholars and officials were sent to Europe, to US, and to Japan to study and have a chance to see different museums in these societies. They realized that museums become very important venues to develop, to showcase and develop modern nation state. Remember those time during late 19th century was a time when a lot of European society was just become modern nation state. A little later, lots of foreigners in China noticed that loss of and destruction of cultural objects. So they volunteered to organize a monument, a society which called China Monument Committee. And they called the Chinese government for the preservation of antiquities, and because they are very important parts of objects. All of these impacts has led to the Qing government and also later Republic government's response. One of the major response legally is develop heritage regulation and laws, echoing with the international heritage regulation during the similar time, a bit later. At the same time, remember I was talking about some scholars went overseas studying in Harvard or in London, and later they came, or Japan, they came back to China, developed this different art department in Beijing, particularly, and a department of archaeology and anthropology. And then they started to do excavation and using Western methods of archaeology and develop new methods of research in the past. That kind of development, this Western discipline in China also evoke a certain kind of debates about the authenticity of history. In previous eras, we often look at history through text because text offers a very important resources. But this time, because of a lot of impartation of new disciplines, people start to question about the authenticity, especially dealing with the old early period, for instance, Xia area or Shang areas. So they are looking, we should more rely on material objects like excavation archaeological findings rather than just those texts. So there was a famous debate called doubting antiquities bullshit. Similar scholars, after they visit Europe societies and also in Japan, they realized museum was a very important venue, and some of them started to develop national museums or local museums in China to showcase antiquity objects within the country. So we see in this area that lots of new development happened in the modern era. Again, we fast track to the contemporary era, different from the Imperial era and also more in the transitional era in the Republic China. This time that after Cultural Revolution, particularly, China started to endorse international heritage regulations, especially UNESCO World Heritage Conventions, and start to kind of collectively embrace so-called World Heritage fever. By listing and nominating different heritage in China, sites and objects, and they start to embrace lots of and motivate and encourage lots of Chinese people to engage with Chinese heritage. One of the practices is looking for roots. China is not just for 60 or 70 years Republic history or People Republic history, but China has a 4,000, 5,000, even now become 6,000 years history. So often locally they're interested in going back to roots and where we are. That kind of leads, root searching also leads to infrastructure building and spatial transformation. Now we see a lot of ancient cities and towns, they start to rebranding themselves as the capital of historical site. For instance, here in image you will see, for instance, Xi'an create a replica of Tang Dynasty Chang'an, and to promote heritage and also through archaeological sites and museums, they perform and celebrate the 1,000 years history as the ancient capital of China. In the meantime, as I said, it's not only a state project, but there's also showing an embrace with the local community and societies, particularly in the name of intangible cultural heritage, RE, which lots of local government and collaborate with local organization and culture industry and also tourism industry that are using intangible cultural heritage to promote local cultural tradition. And this to commercialization, but also has been happening in university and study too, as we discussed in the early of the talk, that students have the chance to study where they come from and the traditional cultural heritage of Han China, Han-centric Chinese heritage. That does not only happen in the real world, but that also thanks to the AI and digital technologies. These days, lots of local government and local communities start to using AI and digital technology and social media to promote their local cultural heritage, especially during COVID period. Here is one of the examples. See, you can hear this is come from Kuaishou, one of the popular social media, and this is coming originated from during COVID era when local communities, villagers in Guizhou, remote area in Guizhou, they utilize their traditional cultural heritage, including craftsmanship and food, to promote their local heritage as part of COVID aviation forthcoming projects during COVID. A quick summary of the historical context part. Through long-duration approach, what we're seeing from the Imperial era to the modern era and now the contemporary era is a continuity in change. We see early on, the so-called high culture was only owned and collected and used by social elites and who had the resources and had power. And later, due to the technology transformation and also shifting public values and platforms, now the public people can also have the chance to access, produce, and consume and share those knowledge of cultural heritage. And technology is a very important role, and not only just in the recent contemporary era, but also we see from the modern, in the modern society, in the transitional era, the development of museum, the development of archaeology as a discipline, all of these contribute to the democratization of the ownership of cultural heritage. This long-duration approach can also help us to think about what China is, especially in a lot of important sinological questions. For instance, here are some examples that I triggered based on this project. What's the relationship between Imperial collection and modern museum and archive, right? And what's the interaction differences between traditional private library, we call it in Chinese 藏书楼, and public library, 图书馆, which is often sought as a Western import during the early Republic or late 20th century. What's the relationship and the interaction between traditional craftsmanship in the Imperial era and the modern Western-based conservation practice now being practiced in modern China? And what's the relationship in the interaction and difference between traditional antiquarianism in Jingshi Street and modern archaeology and anthropology? So all of these practices through this kind of long-duration approach can help us to see the continuity and change and transformation through this approach. I hope this gave you a very kind of brief kind of overview of that kind of historical landscape. But my second part is mainly looking at different cases, especially happened in a local site. I hope I use these local sites can help us to see the details of transformation of them and how they interact with the state, the Imperial court and state in the modern contemporary era, and how that kind of interaction shape the social transformation and knowledge transmission. Due to the time limits, I'm focusing on one of the case, the Orchid Pavilion gathering and the calligraphy, which I mentioned in the beginning of the talk. As I mentioned, the Orchid Pavilion gathering occurred during the Eastern Jin Dynasty. And some of you probably already know that during that particular period, there was consistent conflicts, wars, and invasion of the North. scholars and literates and officials, they were very frustrated and sometimes being very tired, exhausted with all of this social crisis and conflicts. As many of them intended to move away from those social political crises to so-called mountain and river shui, which symbolizing the nature. Some of them have the resource and time, and they often organize gathering and party in a beautiful nature landscape, and we call them literary elegant gathering, Yujie. This gathering happened around 353 CE, April 20, which it was the March of 3rd, according to lunar calendar. It took place in Shanying, Huaiji, which is now Shaoxing, China. It was organized by Wang Xizhi, one of the, now we know that he was a very famous sage of calligraphy. But that time he was also a general of the Right Army and administrator of Huaiji during this period. The gathering was not just simply a party. Traditionally, during that period of time, it was also served as a spring festival ritual. During the late spring festival, according to lunar calendar, 3rd of March, people intended to go into the nature area, and they will encounter with water as a purification of their body, fleeing from the evil from the winter. And you can see from this painting, they will drink, they'll write a poem, and also, as I mentioned at the beginning, they'll play a game that's of the drinking game. And once a cup coming to you, you need to recite and write a poem. Circa 42 social elites participate in this gathering. The reason I'm saying about is because different resources only show 41 or 42. And even sometimes they show 42, and the name of the resource also different. However, we do know 26 of these 42 persons compose 37 poems. And these poems became Orchid Pavilion collection, 19G. As the organizer of this gathering, Wang Xizhi wrote the preface to the Orchid Pavilion collection, which kind of in the contemporary word vocabulary, it's an introduction of edited books. In this introduction, he wrote about the reason we gather. So he basically write about the description of the event. Then later, his work become more imaginary and transcendent sentiments about life and death. So probably he getting semi drunk during that period of time and talk about life and death. From my approach of the longitudinal approach, looking at the lens of heritage, I find interesting that the Orchid Pavilion gathering as a historical event shaped 3 forms of reproduction during that period of time: the site, the calligraphy art, and the gathering. And we will go one by one. First is calligraphy. And the calligraphy itself was a long history of reproduction. And we know that Wang Xizhi wrote that calligraphy. And he even himself cannot replicate that calligraphy. As we know, the calligraphy often engaged with spontaneity. And even the same person wrote the same piece. And he precious it, and then this collection has been owned by his later generation family members. Zhiyong was a monk during circa 581 AD. And we heard again from the source of 19G by He Yanzhi in Tang Dynasty that this piece was owned by Tang Taizhong. He was so interested in and fever about this calligraphy, and a lot of scholars and literati start to copying this piece and creates a lot of reproduction. As we know that the writing or calligraphy art dealing with both spontaneity and transmission. And each of the writer have their own kind of interpretation of the art. That's why even they're talking about reproduction of the calligraphy, they might have their own style. One version of the style can also collect and owned by later generations. And we also find the later generation, the owner will also collect it, stamp on it, and sometimes also write his own piece or her own piece on this piece. So for instance, one of the versions, Shenlong edition, written by Fen Su. And since this version was created, there was a very long history of transmission by different owners. And that collection also being moved around from the Imperial court to royal family members to different libraries and later in the Imperial Qinru. Interestingly, even very early on, even this piece became very famous and being reproduced and transmitted. There was long debates about authenticity. Was it really written by Wang Shizhi, or is it written by later generation? This question was raised early by Zhang Hui during Southern Song Dynasty, and later was again raised by Li Wentian in Qing. It became a very popular debate during modern era by Guo Moruo, based on the modern era's archaeological finding. Guo published an article in 1965. So right on the same year, after Guo Moruo, as a renowned scholar, published article to criticize or question that piece was not written by Wang Shizhi, was written by later generations. One calligrapher, Gao Ershi, in the same year, criticized Guo's point was oversimplistic. And he tried to publish his article, failed because political struggle, and later, supported by Mao Zedong, his article was published. This debate creates a lot of popular debates during similar time. And remember, this was exact time, the start of Cultural Revolution. Most of the article has been collected and become edited books, published in 1973, right during the Cultural Revolution. And here you can see in the left side is the introduction of this piece. I'm going to read it, and you can see the atmosphere of that. After Emperor Tang Taizong Li Shiming determined Orchid Pavilion preface to be an authentic work by Wang Shizhi, a calligrapher from Eastern Dynasty, it was praised and glorified by successive emperors and feudal scholars. Taking advantage of this, lots of forgers produced many fake works, and this caused a lot of confusions in the Chinese calligraphy histories. For a long time, there was a superstition, 迷信, of the Orchid Pavilion preface has dominated in the society, and it's still influenced now. Although a few scholars from the Qing dynasty raised the doubts, they did not really fully express their views. Because it's very important, but facing oppositions, their voice was soon silenced. In 1965, Comrade Guo Moruo published an article, and then further questioned the possibility of Wang Shizhi's authorship, pointing out that not only the calligraphy, but also the text could be written or modified by later generation. Comrade Guo Moruo's views sparked heated debates in academic circles, with many articles published in newspaper and periodicals. Most articles supported Comrade Guo Moruo's opinions, endorsing his use of a dialectical materialistic critic to overturn the evaluation of successful emperors and feudal scholars. However, there were also articles with opposing views, different views. They think the Orchid Pavilion was real. It should be pointed out that this debate reflects the debates between materialistic and idealistic historical view. As long as we implement the party's policy of letting 100 flowers bloom, remember this slogan, and 100 schools of thought content, academic controversies will become clearer through debates. This will undoubtedly contribute to development of academic research and prosperity of socialistic culture. I just roughly translate that, and remember this introduction was written in 1973. There was a clear bias in the collection because you can see the first part and mainly supporting Guo's position, and only very few piece was collected in the second part, supporting the calligrapher's position. The story doesn't really end here, and in 1990s, there was new archaeological excavation finding out that Guo's position was invalid, but that kind of controversy debates to continue. Regardless of all of these debates, the calligraphy of preface still continue to be the very significant of Chinese calligraphy history. Now is the site, the gathering, sorry. As we already mentioned, the calligraphy. There was a long history right after the gathering of the Wang Xiji's party of the reproduction of Orchid Pavilion gathering. And it was less religious as previously, as we said, Shaoxing for purification, but it's become more social and political purpose. For instance, in Tang Dynasty, Tang Hui Wangbo organized similar gathering at Yuanmen Temple, which they recorded as Yuanmen Gathering. Then in Song Dynasty, Li Gongling organized the party, and also he painted the gathering into Xiyuan Yaji, Western Garden gathering, was written and documented by calligrapher Li Fu. And so the idea of painting and calligraphy can document again the historical gathering and to support that kind of knowledge transmission. During the Yuan period, similar gatherings occurred again and again. However, it was a bit different purpose. That time, there was a lot of Chinese Han scholars feel a sense of loss because of attack, and they feel nostalgia for their hometown, and so they feel more about gathering to create a sense of collective cultural identity against assimilation of Mongol culture in that chaotic era. And I found also interesting during the Yuan era, the gathering were more inclusive. So it's not only high class literati, but also including different other groups like monks. But then in Ming Dynasty, the imitation or reproduction of the gathering continuing. But I found also interesting that the gathering was not only a tribute to the early Wang Xiji's party, but they also reproducing late generation, for instance, the Xiyuan gathering in Song. So the Xiyuan, the Song Dynasty gathering become a new form of heritage for imitation in later generations. Each time when you have a gathering, you always have that drinking party. To facilitate that game, there was a lot of infrastructure building in the historical time. So you see, to imitate the party, people also reproduce the stream, and also so the water can flow around the river, around the stream to play, which they called winding stream party, 曲水流觞. And here you can see a photo that located in Guilin. It was originally from Song Dynasty probably. That kind of idea of gathering also traveled to Japan and became very popular during the Nara period. The narrative of Wang Xiji's gathering through literally has been translated into Waka poetry. And then that time, remember, we only have the idea of imagination through text. But then later period, thanks to the imports of ink rubbing in Ming Dynasty, that Japanese scholars start to paint and document the landscape of that gathering in Tokugawa period. Jio Nakai was a scholar through his documentation and to conceptualize and visualize the gathering and also spirit of the preface, which according to that kind of conceptualization, later in the modern era, in different regions of Japan, they start to develop association to pay a tribute to the Orchid Pavilion. For instance, both in 1930, in Tokyo and Kyoto, scholars start to organize a large group of gathering, usually around 300, 400 people, to pay a tribute to the sage of Wang Xiji. That was the gathering. And now the last one was the site, Remember, in the beginning, if we do archaeology knowledge, we only have a text who was written by a drunk person, Wang Xizhi. There was very vague indication of the location. Later, from Beijing to later, there was a long time that people actually do not really know where it actually located. Li Daoyuan, who was also of commentary on the water classic, Shui Jingzhu, who documented the gathering saying that, oh, Wang Xizhi do have visited that place and had a lot of gathering around this area. But even through that kind of verification, it was also still very vague indication of actual location. There was no any landmark like a house or infrastructure. It's only a rough idea about actual mountains. It's only happened until North Song Dynasty in February 1996. Official Pei Yu, who visited a place, and he claimed that, oh, I found the actual location of where Wang Xizhi gathered and played the party. He wrote an article a letter back to the emperor, endorsed by the emperor. He built a temple, which is called Heavenly Pattern Temple, Tianzhangsi, and the pavilion, as a significant cultural landmark of where gathering took place. Since this temple was built, then later generation realized know where this place took place. So it's actually artificial reconstruction of the actual location. As we know about many history of architecture in China, temples, pavilions, or pagodas, they often deal with lots of destruction, earthquakes, fires, rebuilding, restorations. And this happened exactly to the same story for Tianzhangsi and also the pavilion. And here you can see there's a lot of long history of repeating patterns of destruction, fire, restoration, and rebuilding. And including in Qing Dynasty, the Kangxi inscribed that character of Lanting on the stela. And then there was another fire, and then local scholars local officials to renovate the place. During that long process, lots of scholars regard that Wang Xizhi as the sage, and also regard that preface as a destination to be worshipped, and they are worshiping that and visiting the place as a pilgrimage, and they often think about that pilgrimage as a sacred site, and to compare and match with the words and texts written in the preface. And here is the example. Ming scholar Zhang Dai, who recorded his 2 pilgrimage in his lifetime, and he wrote this article on the true side of Orchid Pavilion of Antiquity. In 1607, at the age of 17, he went to this place as a teenager, and he was unsatisfied because the place he visited was not the same exactly like what the text was written, because what just happened, a fire and renovation. He said, again, I would like to acknowledge, thanks to Duncan Campbell's translation, he said, I stood transfixed and wide-eyed, the bamboo, the rocks, the brook, and the hills, none of these seemed at all worth a note. The thing that appeared now before me was a word away from the engraving of the site. Devastated, I choked and sobbed for a long while. So he was unhappy and went back. 60 years later, at age of 77, Zhang Dai went back again. Interestingly, he did some field work, like these days, like us. He interviewed about the monk of the temple. The monk showed him the stelas. He read the stelas, understand the history of the place. He realized, this place was continuously being fired, rebuilt, and restored. That's why my early trip, what I saw was different from the text. He said, for 1,000 years, now I believe that true site of Orchid Pavilion of Antiquity has been lost. Like the authentic version of Wang Xizhi preface itself. Remember the authenticity debates I talked about in calligraphy. This happened probably in the lunchtime, and then he left the temple with his friend B, and trying to go around the place and trying to find ancient sites of the temple. Then he came here, said, soon thereafter, we came across a patch of level ground in front of the heaven temple. And here at last, we saw the high hills with lofty peaks, spoken about the general of the army of the right on the right. The swirling, splashing stream, wonderfully clear. The luxuriant woods and tall bamboos here with the hills encircled us like a screen, and the stream held us in its embrace. Waving its arm, we shouted, "That's it! That's it!" Thereupon we laid out our field rug upon the ground, loosened our belts, and remained there, spread-eagled for a considerable time. Intrigued by the scene, it was late afternoon before we returned. As we've shown here, despite that the actual site was almost the same, probably 60 years ago, but here we can find that the quest for a physical location reflects on the spiritual landscape of ancient scholarships. Through interaction, recollection, and pursuit of imagined historical sites, individuals establish a spiritual connection with the past, a past that ultimately came to life within a realm of the mind. If we travel to contemporary era, all of these elements, the site, the calligraphy, as well as the gathering, merge together in the contemporary world. As we probably can predict, during the Cultural Revolution, the place was destroyed, and lots of places, including the stela written by Kangxi, and also Qianlong, they was destroyed and then later being restored. Since 1980s, when the country started to slowly open up, local government realized the historical significance of the place. Since 1980, they start to reorganize the place after restoration. On 3rd of March, according to the lunar calendar, they organized Orchid Pavilion calligraphy festivals. On that day, they invite lots of calligraphy around the country and play the winging stream party at this place, reconstructed place of the stream. This one was one of example. 10 of April 1987. There was a festival on site. Like old days, 23 Chinese and 18 Japanese calligraphers gathered in mathematics, 41 artists. They practiced calligraphy, writing preface, worship to the Wang Xizhi, and also drinking on the site, and which shows a form of cultural diplomacy. Remember the period of time which Japan and China was an intense relationship because of textbooks. In addition to calligraphy festivals, local government also organized the place as a museum to showcase the history of the place. Archaeological display has been developing on the site to show the foundation of the temple during the Song and Ming dynasty. So later visitors can see what this place was. So this is not anymore a temple. There were no monks. It became an archaeological display site for people to know about history. In addition to that, it is a beautiful park for tourists, especially young generations, dress up traditional hanfu when they're going there in a nice, beautiful day and play around around the park, and also using social media to promote their beauties. They support mass tourism, but also support education. As we show in the earlier of the talk, students have the opportunity to study here. There was dormitory, so they can stay there for 1 week, even longer. And it creates through a practice of calligraphy learning, practice of stamping and rubbing, inciting those preface or our early classics, and worshiping the sage. But interesting, what I found that these kind of practice often focus on the calligraphy and the culture instead of a content of text. So they are not really precisely to understand or to start to interpret what actual meaning of those texts. because the text was actually very hard to understand. Rather than those more representation of the text, the culture, the rubbing, the practice, and all of these help them to develop a sense of cultural identity and who I am, and as a Chinese young generation. The museum was established on site to show in the history and also display different versions from reproduction versions from the past. And those museum was not only happened on site, exhibition has also organized in China, also beyond China. For instance, two exhibitions happened in Japan, and even last week, I figured out there was an exhibition in Singapore about the calligraphy, showing the culture, art exchange, and diplomacy with China and around the world. Which is even more interesting. These days, we find that this kind of idea of Lantern Pavilion gathering or the drinking party and can be transformed into other form of commodity. These days, whenever you are, anyone, anywhere, anytime, and any form, people can have a sense of the gathering and the Yujie and the preface gathering in different format. So the first photo I found from the social media, which took place in somewhere in US. The other photo I don't know, somewhere in one restaurants, and people can doing that kind of game and have a nice dinner. What does this mean, and what does story tell us? When we often trace back to Wang Xizhi as the sage, I often enjoy my quotation back to the sage of this place, Pierre Rickman. When he talked about China's heritage, he said, the vital strengths, the creativity, the seemingly unlimited capacity for metamorphosis and adaptation, which the Chinese tradition displayed for 3,500 years, may well derive from the fact that this tradition never let itself be trapped into set forms, static objects, and things, where it would have run the risk of parasites and deaths. I think that the story of Wang Xizhi gathering and also the gathering and also the calligraphy show us what Pierre Rickman said. The first is a relationship between authenticity and creativity. As we're seeing from this story, that regardless of different form of reproduction and transmission, the idea of creativity intertwined with spontaneity and which contribute to the transmission of that cultural heritage. The second, I would also like to highlight the relationship between tangible and intangible. Often we have a binary division that Western societies focus on materiality, intangible, while the Chinese cultural heritage focus on spirituality, the intangible. However, this project or this case has shown the interconnective or interrelative relationship between tangible and intangible. Both the tangible, which is the art, the calligraphy, or the material site, the stream, or the cups, or the intangible, the practice of rubbing, the practice of reproduction, the practice of party and drinking, they play similar, different but very important role. Without both tangible and intangible, this project, this art or heritage cannot continue. The more interesting I also find is a similar pathway that this kind of practice, initially owned by social elites, by those 41 or 42 person, and later become a romantic consumption that has been transformed into the public domain. And whenever you are in any form that people can even pay a tribute to that kind of gathering in the form of Yujie. However, we should not forget that, as I mentioned about continuity in change, regardless of transformation and change as a plural, there's also continuity, which I mean heritage has been always a social and political action. When we imagine, trace back to 1700 years ago, when Wang Xizhi and other 41, including Xian, those scholars, trying to use that gathering as an escape from politics and social crisis, it's also a political action. As action to responding to those social wars and crises. But these days, we have seen very different, but also similar kind of social political action. Governments And the students have the chance to going back to those places and gather. And through gathering, through education, and through calligraphy practice, they learn where they come from as a very important form of identity building and political education. The book was written during the eras during early 20s. As we know, there was a lot of crisis. These challenges has not been even getting worse when we see a lot of ongoing wars and also continued debates about energy and climate crisis that has been intensified by economic disparity, social classes, inequities. So we see, as French historian Francis Hartog mentioned, that the future is no longer a source of hope, but it's become a threat. In the face of these global challenges, there have been significant trends in the way that society should remember the relationship between the past, the present, and the future, because they all impact the nature of the real politics. Against this global social transformation, we saw China has also undergone notable changes. And why we have shown a lot these days that the remote past, Confucius, for instance, has been consistently utilized to promote Chinese identity. But we also see these days that the recent past, as shown from the photo, that has been, especially those revolutionary legacies, has been utilized for patriotic education. To learn about the spirit of Communist Party as the nation's foundation. Promoting both the recent and the remote is not contested, but they coherently work together to show and contribute a unified national culture. They serve the current political regimes by promoting the ideas of progress, development, and national unity. In the meantime, we also see the future pose another significant challenges for us. We see the development of social media and AI. Particularly, we saw the manipulation of AI has altered and sometimes dominate the ways in which knowledge is shared and disseminated, and also shape the way how we actually access the past. Why we often enjoy those beautiful romantic forms in the social media or AI. Sometimes we embrace, they offer us opportunities for education, but we should be aware and be careful that often it's fragmented and sometimes politically manipulated and romanticized historical production and consumption. In a world shaped by all of these complex challenges, technological innovations, and opportunities, the landscape of research and education has undergone a significant transformation. This reflects on us the essence and purpose of being a scholar, like all of you, and the role of humanity in this rupture and social transformation in general, like what Wang Xizhi dealing with. While my final words may have contained a mixture of hope and a bit of pessimism about the future, something really inspired me when I prepared this talk. I discovered that in 2022, an Italian astronaut, Samantha Cristofori, quoted a sentence from the Wang Xizhi lecture gathering on Twitter when she flew over Beijing. She said, "Looking up, I see the immensity of cosmos. Bowing my head, I look at the multitude of the world. The gate flies, the heart expands. The joy of sense can reach its peak, and indeed, that is true happiness." Wang Xizhi could never have imagined that his work would be quoted by an Italian astronaut, or observing the cosmos from such a close vicinity, almost 1700 years later. In the final paragraph of paraphrase to the Orchid Pavilion, the calligraphy Wang Xizhi explained the reason, maybe he get drunk, for writing this paraphrase. Future generation will look upon us just as we look upon the past. Even though time and consciousness differ, the emotions and sentiments remain unchanged. For future readers, he's talking to us. You will likewise be moved by what is in this writing. These final words express his hope that emotions and sentiments conveyed in cultural works can endure over time. He was obsessed with the idea of continuity for the future that has proceeded throughout the rise and fall of the future of the past and us in the present. In line with Wang Shichu's hope and aspiration from 1700 years ago, let us revisit the scene from the beginning of the talk. And when we portrait students' activity at the Lenti. Even though we may not fully grasp the diversity in emotion of those students, we can't capture how happy it was that in Italian astronauts. Orchid Pavilion calligraphy at the site where the gathering took place still serve as a wellspring of inspiration for those who seek to rekindle the meaning of the past. Such activity, like to other modern heritage practice, proceed in nourishing our understanding of the past and illuminating the past forward into the future of China and the world. Thank you very much.
By the way, it's Fullerton.
In Canberra. I highly recommend you visit that place in a cool summer.